Thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Oh, Ingrid, the one of the greatest honors and privileges of my life has been knowing Ingrid, knowing Tina, and just working with you guys over the years. I love it. I love it. There's something about being with a Christ-centered group that's totally different from any other group that you can join. Now, before we begin, I'd like to invite our online friends to take a look at the chat. You'll find my email address in the chat, and we have a handout. If you will email me at that address, I will be glad to send you a copy, a PDF of the handout as well, so that you'll have what we're doing today and don't have to scramble to make mad notes. I've been to enough conferences and enough classes. I know how that goes. You get more if you listen than if you're trying to make notes about what I said 2 minutes ago. So there we go. Today we're looking at creativity, your God-given right to be creative. And I love the idea of creativity simply because it's something that we all have access to, but sometimes we deny ourselves. And that's what we're going to look at today. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to do a presentation for the Fay B. Kegler Children's Literature Conference up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, on creativity for teachers and librarians. And out of that came this book, Basic Creativity for the Real World. Okay, and it was a lot of fun. But I realized my writing buddies weren't getting enough detail out of it. So I went back and did an author's version, jumpstart the creativity in your writing, to be able to put in exercises and things specific to writers. Okay, so that's those two.
Did you bring extras if somebody
I do have a couple of copies with me. And then finally, so many people said, but I want more exercises. So I put together a little 60-day journal that allows little simple exercises to spark your creativity. Just because I'm OCD and as I said, creativity is a gift from God, and I have a biblical basis for saying that it is a God-given right. Think back to Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And everything else, he did it. He's the man. He's the one. I hate to say he's the man, but that's the phrase. He is the one who created everything. We're made in his image. Genesis 1:26 through 27 tells us so. Well, part of that image is creativity. He instructed us to supervise his creation in Genesis 1:28. We need to employ our creativity to do that, to be able to work within the layout of what he's created and to be able to make the most of it for him as well as for us. Because what we do to his glory. Creativity is more than just an artistic connotation. I know sometimes people get hung up on that. It has to do with problem solving, relationship applications, all sorts of things. We're going to be looking at it from a poetic view today, but it's not limited to that. When God creates an engineer who can build an amazing home for people who need a home, that's creativity. Sometimes there's a lot of education that goes into it, but you have to employ that education with creativity. So that's where we are. And if it sounds a little intimidating, don't let it be, because there's a formula, a recipe for creativity. And I've put it on your handout for you. It's inspiration plus imagination plus information. And when you add those together in any order, it's not like French cooking where you have to put them in a certain order. Put those things together, you're going to result in creativity. Now, you may have to sleep on it and let it percolate through your mind overnight, but that's where creativity comes from, putting all of that together, that aha moment. So how do you get to the aha moment? Well, let's start with inspiration. First off, inspiration comes from what you keep within you and around you. And when we start off with prayer, we start off with the Bible, we're building that inspiration inside. The other inspiration comes from things that we surround ourselves with. If I say the name Ray Bradbury, does that mean anything to you? I see the smile. Ray Bradbury was almost infamous for his office. And if you've ever watched Ray Bradbury Theater, the TV show, he starts out in his office, walking through, and it's everything all over, shelves and shelves and shelves of stuff, of books and maps and pictures and statues and toys and puzzles and awards and memorabilia. And as he says in the opening of that show, I'll never go hungry here. There is plenty around that office for him to look around and spark the inspiration to give him that idea. Do the same thing. If there is something that speaks to you, and I'm not saying be a hoarder, I'm a hoarder, don't do like me, but things that speak to you, things that bring your ideas to life, then by all means, go ahead and hang on to that in some manner. Meaningful things. It might be a souvenir of a beloved vacation, happy memories. I mean, how many of you, and you don't have to raise your hands, I'm just going to ask for you to think about it for a minute. How many of you have napkins and mementos from weddings and parties that you went to that weren't your wedding or your party? Yeah, why do we save them? Because they are a meaningful event to us, and they help us to remember and think back and enjoy those times. So meaningful things are okay. I mean, think about those napkins. You can put those in an album. They don't take up much room. Okay? Photograph inspirational things. Now, back in the day, we had to carry big old bulky cameras around, but nowadays, we can do it with our phone. Yeah. Our phone, our iPad, whatever it may be. Take those pictures when you see that moment. It's like, look at that. That is God's hand so surely. That beautiful sunset. That absolutely wonderful. I had a chance to visit a friend who lives down on the Mississippi Sound, and to walk out to the edge of her property and look out over the Sound to Horn Island. Yes, I took pictures. It was so beautiful. I had to. People, places, things that you experience can help to feed that inspiration. My first novel was Death in the Daylilies. The picture on the cover of Death in the Daylilies is a picture that I took on the Hattiesburg Daylily driving tour back in 2013. I didn't know anything about daylilies except that I loved them. They were so pretty. My grandmother used to grow them. But that whole event started the chain of thought that ended up with Death in the Daylilies, my first novel. So, don't be afraid to take those pictures. And yes, I doctored it. There was no blood on any of the daylilies that I saw that day. But, it is what it was an inspiration. And that event and the photos that I took of it got me interested enough to look into the background of daylilies and growing them and to do research about them. And there you go. Copy things. Now, I know we're always careful about plagiarism, and I'm not saying plagiarize, but copy things that are meaningful to you. I have notebooks dating all the way back to my elementary school days where I have copied poetry that I fell in love with. I couldn't afford, come on, who in 5th grade can afford to go out and buy books of poetry? But I had a notebook, and I wrote them out in longhand. I collected them and copied them, and you know what? When you do that, you start learning about rhyme. You start learning about meter and what works and what doesn't. And why did I like this so much? What was it about this poem? Was it the wording? Was it the imagery? Those are the things that I learned over the years, and I've still got those notebooks. I did it all the way through high school. And I look back and I go, oh boy, my handwriting was atrocious. But you know what? I can still read those wonderful poems that led me to fall in love with poetry. Don't be afraid to copy something for practice. If you've ever, and I know we're not talking about art so much here, but if you've ever gone to an art museum, chances are you've seen art students sitting there copying the great masters. Because the more they learn about the composition and the brushstrokes and the colors and the themes, the better artists they become. So copying for your own education is perfectly okay. Just don't try to pass it off as your own work. That's plagiarism. We don't want to get into that. Okay. Study things. The more you learn, the more you'll be inspired. When I started Death in the Daylilies, all I knew was that there were lots of colors of daylilies, and they were all beautiful. I also learned that they don't reproduce from seed, they reproduce from scapes. I learned that there are 2 kinds, and they don't talk to each other very well. I learned all sorts of interesting things that actually led me to the motive in my book. The more you learn, the more you can apply and be inspired to use it. Don't be afraid to research. And in fact, you're going to research way more than you use. Was it worth it? Oh yeah. When the past historian of the American Hemerocallis Society, which at that time was the National Daylily Growers Association. They've now changed it to the American Daylily Society because people can pronounce it. When he got in touch with me and said, "You got it right," I was like, yes, thank you, Lord. It was worth it to do all that hard research and that digging around and reading and note-taking. And yes, when you find somebody who sees the evidence of the work, even though you didn't outline all the work, then you know you got it right and you've done well with it. Okay, so one other source of inspiration that I would give to you is listen to inspiring music. Whatever music it is that inspires you. I'm not going to give you my list because that may not be the list that speaks to you, but I will give you one. In the garden. I cannot hear in the garden without that peace. You know, so make a list. And we used to call it a playlist or a mixtape back in the day. Nowadays you can make a playlist on any of the sites. Have what you want. You know, YouTube, streaming music, whatever it may be, have those available. Okay? Part 2 of our formula, our recipe, is imagination. How do we nurture our imagination? Well, first off, read. Read on many, many topics. Don't limit it to just what you normally write about because you never know where the next little idea is going to come from. This is such a big thing that Walt Disney kind of stole the idea of, Alcoa is actually the ones, Alcoa aluminum, that originally came up with the idea of Imagineering, pairing imagination and engineering to make something more. Then Disney actually went in and copyrighted it later. But they encourage their people to read on everything. We as poets
need to be reading other people's poetry too to know what kind of trends are going on, but not just poetry. Read, what's going on in the news. Some of my most recent poetry has come out of some of the news stuff that's going on because there's just so much horrific going on. When you read, even if it's not something that you figure you're going to use right then in your poetry, we have a lot of ways that our brain percolates through it, and we'll start putting it together in ways that you didn't imagine. I've had the privilege of being around arboretums. Now, in case you're not sure what an arboretum is, it's basically a park for trees. And they have different themes and different ideas. There's one in Illinois that I used to frequent that their idea was each section of it is a reproduction of the flora of a particular part of the world. In Picayune, we have the Crosby Arboretum, which is what does the Pearl River watershed look like? What are the things that grow there? My college campus in Illinois was an arboretum. We've got sections here in New Orleans, and I'm sure part of City Park is probably designated as an arboretum. This came out of that.
I read about arboretums. I traveled through arboretums. I visited arboretums whenever I could because I find them very soothing. And one day it was like, what if there's a body out here in the arboretum?
Oh.
So I talked to the caretaker. And I asked him, have you ever found anything odd back here? And he says, well, sometimes we find evidence of people sneaking in with alcohol, but nothing more sinister than that so far. So I had to kind of come up with another way of looking at it. But you know what? Visiting places, seeing the remoteness of some of those sections of the Arboretum and how they're not in view of any of the buildings kind of makes you wonder what might go on. And that's where Ambush at the Arboretum came from. That's right. And visiting sites, which is our next point. Visit a lot of sites. The more places you visit, the more you're going to see. The more ideas you're going to see. The more potential locales you're going to see. The friend that I told you about on the Mississippi Sound has an entire book. She was the Poet of the Year for the Mississippi Poetry Society a couple of years ago. And her book was based on the inspirations that she sees from her backyard. Just visiting her backyard in different seasons, different times of the day. You never know. So visit a lot of places. And yes, I know it's been hard lately, but it's amazing what you can visit virtually. I have been to, I'm going to say it wrong, I know, Les Invalides in Paris, which has been a hospital, it's been a burial ground, it's been all sorts of things. But it's a museum, and there's an online tour you can take and just walk through the whole thing. I've never been to France, I don't even have a passport. But I've visited virtually, so don't be afraid to take advantage of technology to do what you would like to do. What you're doing right here. Attend events, lectures, and classes where you're going to learn. I have found, even if most of it is something that I already knew, it's refreshing the idea in my mind, and there's always something that's like, I never thought of that. Don't be afraid to go out and visit those events and lectures and learn from them. And of course, now we do a lot of it virtually. Many, many sites have libraries of their videos of lectures. Look into what applies to you, what interests you,
and take advantage of it. I have a YouTube channel, so go visit my YouTube channel. Borrow from the arts. Now, I'm sure, I'm going to ask a stupid question. How many of you have heard of ekphrastic poetry? Okay. Ekphrastic poetry is poetry based on some other art form. Whether it was inspired by a painting or a statue or a story. That's an ekphrastic poem. And I brought one, I think. E-K, oh wait, yeah, sure, I'm going to remember. EKPHRASTIC. I won 3rd place in the Spring Mississippi Poetry Society competition with this one in the ekphrastic category based on the Pieta, Michelangelo's sculpture. Agony, the pain of it all. My beloved son, my firstborn, now a corpse in my arms, his flesh bleeding and torn. How will I go on from here? Why should I desire to live when they have taken away the one to whom I offered all I had to give? Now his blood dries on feet and hands, God bless you, pierced by nails, a brow clawed by thorns. Rational thought fails. He was God's own son, and yet they crucified him, taunted, tortured, and derided as none stood beside him. Through mother's tears, I hear his whispered promise clear. The 3rd day I will rise again. Weep not, my mother dear. And so I hold the broken shell which once contained my boy. But in his words, I dry my tears and count this moment joy. That's inspired by the art piece. That's an ekphrastic poetry. You've probably written them without thinking about it. So don't be afraid to borrow from other arts. Our next item is information. Let your curiosity lead you into researching whatever it is that's going to be of interest. Research a subject, whether it be fiction, nonfiction, periodicals, on the internet. Just don't believe everything you read on the internet. The more you read about your subject, the more information you get, the more imagination and inspiration can kick in. Research is a valuable tool. Okay? Experience your world for information as well. If you're going to write about a locale, experience the locale. If you've ever come across something where they talk about something in New Orleans and you go, no, just no, that's not right. That's somebody who didn't do their research, didn't get the information right. Years ago, Clint Eastwood did a movie in New Orleans. And I mean, it was a real thriller of a movie. But he had one scene where they came running down the steps. He's chasing the bad guy, running down the steps from the moonwalk. They run a few feet, jump a fence, and suddenly they're in Metairie Cemetery. Everybody, and I was still living here then, and everybody in the theater who was so excited to see this movie that was filmed in our hometown went, no. Don't let that happen, because that just destroyed the credibility of the whole film. It will destroy the credibility of your work. Unless you are doing something to make a point, make sure that you're accurate with your information. Do we have any trekkers with us today? Yeah. A Star Trek fan.
My sister was one.
There you go. I want you to take two things from Star Trek. Okay, in the opening credits, what did Captain Kirk say their mission was? To boldly go. Not sit at home and think about it. To boldly go researching that information, finding out new things. The other one was the Vulcan Award. Anybody remember what that was? Okay, the IDIC, the IDIC, infinite diversity in infinite combinations. That's what we celebrate with our writing, the combinations of words and meter and rhyme. When we do that, we are writing poetry that's going to last, that's going to impact somebody. If we just do the same boring rhyme every time, it's not going to make any penetration into their mind. It's not going to make any penetration, oops, sorry, into their heart. Not supposed to grab the microphone. But do think about that, and don't be afraid to try new words, try new patterns, new meters, new forms. That's one of the things I love about entering these writing contests, is because they've got a list of all these competitions, and some of them specify specific forms. You have to write something in that form. Now, they may give you a topic, they may not. One of them, and I was crazy. This is one, and I'm kind of proud of this one because it took first place in its category. The name of it is The Die Hard Fan. Were you listening last night? Did you hear the cries? Did you feel the anguish and the desperate sighs? Was your heart torn out by the end result? Did you take the conclusion as an awful insult? When the winner was named, did you shed a tear? Does the outlook seem grim for the rest of the year? We haven't ever felt that, have we? Had you poured your heart into supporting your team? Has the final score punctured your bubble of dream? Don't let the bad news make you lose hope or pride. Believe in them, cheer them, and stay for the ride. For any game's outcome can go either way. Why just beat the socks off of them the next time we play? Now that was to be rhymed couplets. And that was the only guidance, okay? And there you go. So you can have a lot of fun with it. Don't be afraid to. And when you look at any contest that you may enter, and there are tons of them that you can look up online, read what they want, and then put the IDIC to it. Put that infinite diversity in infinite combinations. Okay? So, organization. We've done all this work, we've got all these ideas, we've got all this research. What are we going to do with it? Well, let your curiosity, I'm sorry, no, that's the wrong way. Organize it. If you don't organize it, that curiosity was for no good reason. You gained nothing. There are electronic ways that you can organize a lot of products, and I've got a link on the handout that will give you information about some of the different products like OneNote and Scrivener and Sigil, Y-Writer and Manuscript with a K. Those are some of them that are out there. That's not all. But you can check those out if you don't already have one that works for you. Organize it on shelves. Binders, books, reference books, whatever, you can organize it on shelves. That's perfectly fine. You might put it on a bulletin board. And it may be an electronic bulletin board like Pinterest. A lot of authors are using Pinterest to organize images and ideas. So don't be afraid to do that if it works for you.
You can put it in folders in a filing cabinet. That, it's a little old school, but hey, it works. Don't be afraid to organize it in whatever way works for you. It's not about how I do it, it's about what's going to work best for you. And you want to make sure that you're using the things that are going to keep it orderly in a method that you can use. Wall hangings. Now, I have to admit, I watch a lot of cop shows. I'm a mystery writer, so I watch a lot of cop shows. What do they always have? They've got the big board with all the case notes on it, okay? A wall hanging, a bulletin board, a whiteboard, Post-it notes, whatever works for you to keep track of the information, to tie it together, to make the connections that you need to make. Whatever. Remember those notebooks I mentioned where I kept all the poems that I copied? There's another set of notebooks, which is the ones I've been writing. I wrote one in elementary school, which the teacher decided to send off to a contest, and I never saw it again. That's the last time I lost a poem, because I keep my copy in my, and I go back and I look at them and I say, boy, you have really grown, thank heavens. Don't be afraid to go back and look and see how far you've come. That's okay. But having those notebooks, sometimes that old poem will go, I like that idea, I can execute it better. And that'll get you going on something. So yeah, if you wrote it, organize it, hang on to it. Because you never know where that next idea is coming from. So we've gone through getting that recipe going. Next is application. Application is taking all the parts and pieces together and putting them together. Fleshing out your idea. Okay? There are things that you're going to want to do, just like an athlete exercises the muscles that they need for their event. They also exercise other things. You're going to go in, you're going to take that basic idea, you're going to add detail, you're going to add design and color and feeling, emotion, all those things that are important to the success of your work. So go in and do that in your application phase.
We don't have application.
We don't have that.
Don't have application?
We got
Oh.
stopping ground rules.
Okay. Well,
She'll email
here
it
you
to
get
us.
to make notes, yeah. You're going to get feedback. You're going to want to get feedback. Perfect group. Come here, get feedback on it. These are your strong points. This could be a little stronger. You got a great idea going here. Okay? And then remember, you have to submit. Hit the ground running. If you don't submit that poem to a contest, to an anthology, to a magazine, whatever it may be, nobody's going to see it but you. Now take a look. Now, well, let's go back to B. Okay? One of the issues that we have as authors is we want to overcome cliches, boring writing, and mental blocks. And one way we can do it is by setting an oddball limitation on yourself. It can be a duration of time, it can be a word count, it can be write a couplet about footprints on the sand. Okay? It's an oddball idea. And here are a couple of examples to get you started. Can you write a 4-line verse profile of the color black without using the words black or dark or any word derived from them? Okay. Another one, describe a scene on the beach without using the word sand. It's challenges for you, something to just knock you out of your normal routine, make you look at things a little bit differently. And as I mentioned earlier, for those of you on Zoom, I will send you this handout if you'll email me, and we'll get you the exercises. So here we go. This is how I got that list, okay? Stretch your writing muscles by playing word association. Flip to a page in a book or a periodical. Close your eyes and use your finger to select a random word. Jot down the first word you think of in association with it. Repeat that 9 times. You get 10 words. Now use the 10 words you've just written to create a scene or a verse of at least one page. Okay? Now, these are the 10 words I found. What would have been my word association list with them? So you can go either way with it. Number 2, create an entire scene or an entire verse where every sentence starts with the same letter. For a real challenge, have every sentence end with the same letter, but a different one from the opening letter.
Exercise in your brain.
Just the thought of it.
Now, think about if you've ever written an acrostic poem.
David did.
You know, you're starting with an assigned letter to spell out a word or a phrase or whatever. Same idea, only it's the same letter for every line. And think how hard we work to avoid that in real life. And then here we are saying do it. But it's to break you out of that routine. Okay? Number 3, as your favorite fictional protagonist, write a short letter in verse to the antagonist explaining how the villain should make things right and become a hero. Okay? And that's the one where I just want to write a poem to Delilah and tell her to leave Samson's hair alone.
Not good for you, woman.
Now, as the antagonist, write a letter in verse to the protagonist justifying your behavior. Because, I mean, the fact is, villains don't think they're villains. They have everything rationalized in their mind.
Yeah, they're the good guys.
So,
And everything's right in there.
yeah.
Devil made me do it.
I hope I've given you a lot of food for thought.
More than for the credit.
And I hope that you're going to have a lot of fun working with it.
It's going to be a test next month.
There you go. And I want to see all of your results. Email me your results.
I will.
Now, on the subject of devotions, I brought 2 of my devotion books with me. Sometimes devotions come in the form of poetry. And one of these, actually there's a video, you've got a video of me reading it
I do.
from this one, because it was
Did you
about,
bring extra of those?
yeah, I have a
Okay.
couple. Devotions can come in the form of poetry as well as prose. And a lot of mine started as I was writing a daily column online and posting it to a website called Good News Now. They wanted devotions every day. So I was working on that. I updated them later and put them together in the book. This one is from while I was taking care of my mom. This is for caregivers, and to try to, you know, for a long time there was nothing for caregivers. You were the forgotten people. And so I put this together, the things that I wish I had had available to me at the time, the insights that I gained through that time. So don't be afraid of getting into devotionals with poetry. And sometimes Helen Steiner Rice.
Oh,
Yeah. Helen Steiner Rice is like the inspiration for all of us when it comes to devotional poetry, because she made her career of that, and so many books, so many items that have been based on that, posters and coffee mugs and you name it. When we are putting together thoughts to God's glory, we're not just putting them together for a book. We're putting them together for hearts, to touch hearts. And that's what we want to do. So I hope that these tools will help you with that. And as I mentioned, I do have one more gift for you, and this is the Creativity Bill of Rights. Okay, you have a God-given right to be creative.
Because he's the creator, so
You have the right to nurture your creativity. You have the right to apply your creativity to a variety of situations and circumstances. You have the right to appreciate the creative results of others. You have the right to use curiosity as a divining rod to lead you toward creative discoveries in all realms of life. You have the right to express your creativity in safe and productive ways which do no harm to others. You have the right to use your creativity to make your life, your family, your work, your community, and your world a better place.
Can I post this on my website?
You certainly may,
Okay, it will be on the website. This is very good.
because too many times people deny their own creativity. Oh, I can't be creative. I'm not trained enough or educated enough or special enough. God made you, sweetie. That makes you creative.